Hi, my name is Linda Navajor, and I am part of the ESL and Bilingual Education Group. And today I'm going to present to you on white privilege and the achievement gap. Um, so my presentation is basically going to consist of, what white privilege is and what the achievement gap is. I'm going to talk a little about that, and then we're going to end it with how that actually affects the bilingual education. So I hope you enjoy it. All right, so that being said, we're now going to talk about what white privilege actually is. I found this definition from the website of Tim Wise. He is one of the nation's most prominent anti-racist essayists and educators. He's given lectures in colleges and universities and in all 50 states, and he's helped train medical, corporate, federal, and governmental institutions on races and anti-racism. Um, I actually do have a 9-minute video if you got on one of his speeches of on white privilege. It's down below if you guys want to check that out. So that being said, I'm now going to go read his definition of what white privilege actually is. White privilege refers to any advantage, opportunity, benefit, head start, or general protection from negative societal mistreatment which persons deemed white will typically enjoy, but which others will generally not enjoy. These benefits can be material, such as greater opportunity in the labor market or greater net worth, due to a history in which whites had the ability to accumulate wealth to a greater extent than persons of color. Social, such as presumptions of competence, creditworthiness, law-abidingness, intelligence, etc., or psychological, such as not having to worry about triggering negative stereotypes, rarely having to feel out of place, and not having to worry about racial profiling, etc. So, I thought that this kind of long definition actually included a lot of the key points of what white privilege actually is and how inadvertently it benefits people of a non-minority status, especially since we're talking about education and that having to worry about triggering negative stereotypes. That's a very important thing for minority students, and because there is a a very pervasive um, negative stereotypes over certain races and the way they dress, and all of that psychologically affects the student, especially when you're a young child, you're a teenager, and you're having all these other issues coming on top of this, and you also have to think about oh, what are the teachers going to think about me, and how are they going to treat me based on these negative stereotypes. So that being said, um, they for for a lot of people it is kind of a little bit of a touchy subject because they're like, oh well, I didn't mean to be born this way. I'm sorry, like I feel guilty. Like why you're making me feel guilty? However, I don't think it's about guilt. I think it is you can't. It's something that is out of everybody's control. However, it is important to be aware of it. Even if something as small for someone, such as like the fact that band-aids that are flesh colored are actually cream and or white-ish. So you might say, well, that doesn't really matter to me. It's just a band-aid. However, I think that the problem with it is that it's been called flesh colored, and underneath that, it kind of implies that the normal color of flesh should be that cream whitish color. And as we all know, flesh comes in all different colors. You also have a flesh crayon. So, these kind of things underline these, undercurrents of, institutionalized racism that people don't really think about. So, yeah, I'm going to move on now to the next part of my presentation. All right, so now I'm going to talk about, about the perks of being white. I'm just going to, briefly kind of say some of the benefits that comes from being from a non-minority race. I did read Peggy McIntosh's White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. I thought there was a lot of really good points made that she made in that. However, I'm not going to read all of them. I did pull one of the most important ones, however, for this discussion, in my opinion. So I'm going to read that to you right now. So Peggy McIntosh says, I can remain oblivious of the language and customs of person of color who constitute the world's majority without feeling in my culture any penalty for such oblivion. I find this to be particularly true, especially in this discussion of, English language learners and bilingual education. Um, so, just I pulled out, some examples from like just the top of my head, and I want to share those with you. So Urban Outfitters actually sells Native American, inspired like jewelry and outfits and all these things. And the problem with that is that it's considered like a fashion choice by many people. Um, However, that is actually pulled from someone's culture. Like, though that is the traditional dress of someone's culture, and even so, though, no one who wears these, myself included, is actually expected to know about the traditional background of these, of these outfits, and we're not penalized for not knowing it. It's kind of assumed that we're not going to know, and nobody, pays any attention to it, and nobody really cares whether you do or you not, or if you do not. Another one of these that I like to point out too is this whole celebration of Cinco de Mayo. It just passed, so if you guys, walked outside, you saw all the restaurants with Cinco de Mayo inspired happy hours and all the people in sombreros and stuff like that. And if you didn't, well, you missed out, because I definitely did in Bethesda. But, it's fun and it's a good time and all that. However, you know, not many people know about its significance to the Mexican people, actually. Most people actually think it's Mexican Independence Day, or, they don't even think about it at all. But it's actually about the Battle of Puebla, where, like, it was a Mexican victory over the French. So that was, that was a big deal, especially since, French was a big power at the time. And, so people don't know this, and yet, even so, people still celebrate it. You see, like, the picture of the girls with their sombreros and their fake mustaches, and, and you can say, like, oh, they're just having fun. However, there is a problem with that kind of mentality, because that's someone else's culture, that's someone else's history that you're using, and at the same time, you're not getting penalized for not knowing it. It's okay for you, as a non-minority, or for someone of a non-minority, to not know about this historical significance and yet still benefit from the celebration aspect of it. And I think all this really translates really well into the way that we view English language learners. And I say this because, as someone from a non-minority, I mean, not me personally, because I'm not from a non-minority, but as, like, someone from a non-minority group, for example, can, celebrate Cinco de Mayo, or, say something offensively without meaning to someone of a minority group, and, at the same time, they could be like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know, and there's no cultural backlash for it. Most people will be like, oh, that's okay, you didn't know. However, English language learners and people who immigrate into this country are expected to assimilate, wholeheartedly into the culture. They're expected to learn the languages, and God forbid they do something without meaning to, and without knowing, then, it's not only them, but their whole race who is judged by those standards. So, for example, just a brief example is, in Panama, at least, where I'm from, it's okay for neighbors to, open your mail. It's not like they're going to read it, they just open it. Or from other family members, do that for you. And then they hand it to you. That's traditionally, like, that's fine. Like, nobody really cares. However, if you do that here, that's actually a federal crime. Big deal, right? So, what happens is, if someone, from a minority does that without knowing, so a person who just immigrated into the country, they could get into there's some serious repercussions for them. They could get into serious legal problems. And especially nobody's going to say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know, and they're not going to be believed. The other person's going to say, well, I don't care, you're still going to the police. um, so you see kind of like the discrepancy here, how your race and like where you're at actually, how that can influence you. So I think that's one of the most important things about not having any penalty, and over oblivions of other person's cultures and customs, and how that really differs depending on where you're standing on the line. Um, my another point that I wanted to make was, it's I pulled this from, it's actually a quote that I pulled from "White Means Never Having to Say You're Ethnic," by Pamela Perry. So she says that white culture is invisible because it's constructed as normal. Um, so what that means really, it's not. She's not arguing if there is a white culture or if there's not a white culture. However, she is arguing that there is kind of what should I call it? That it's become kind of invisible in a sense. I'll have a quote about it here. It says, my argument here is not so much about whether there is or is not a white culture, but about the power whites exercise when claiming they have no culture. Culturalness can serve, even if unintentionally, as a measure of white racial superiority. It suggests that one is either normal and simply human, therefore the standard to which others should strive, or beyond culture, or post-cultural, therefore developmentally advanced. Um, so you see, how my next point, how that fits into my next point, which is white culture has no definition. Only those who deviate from the norm have culture. That's why it's so hard if someone asks, oh well, what is our national food in the United States? Well, there's so many different people here in the United States that there is no one traditional food, um, or there's no one traditional dress either, I believe, unless I'm much mistaken. Um, However, I feel like that is also very important because, by saying that, well, this is what it is, like there's no culture, like we just are, you're kind of implicitly suggesting that, you know, your race or your culture is superior than everybody else. And so you make a line dividing us and them, which creates a lot of problems, in schools and in society in general. Um, so in this same essay, she points out this argument made by Renato Rosaldo and David Theo Goldberg. So she says Rosaldo points out that everyone has a culture. It fundamentally shapes all people's understanding of themselves and the world, but the visibility of one culture differs according to social status. Cultural invisibility is a characteristic of all those who hold full citizenship and institutional power in the nation state. Um, Cultural invisibility is a privileged status making the most rational and hence deserving of power and privilege people against those who are not rational, those who are cultural. So you see, kind of like what I was trying to get at, like the little problem with that. So that's why there's so much division, and I made a few examples of that. So if someone is born here and they're from a minority group, they're usually included when in the description of themselves. They're called Mexican Americans or Asian Americans. However, with a non-minority person, it is just simply American. You never hear someone saying, "Oh, I'm European American." It is just simply American. So implicitly, that suggests that everybody else is an other. So you are something else, an American, while Americans are the only people who are of this country. Or I want to say truly of this country, which not only is it historically inaccurate, but it is kind of an issue, and that creates kind of prejudices and mentalities that will then translate into this issue of institutionalized racism and racist thought. So that is what I wanted to say about white privilege, and that is going to be it.